Hi folks, my name is Jeff Kozma. I'm a wildlife biologist and I work for the Yakima Nation. The purpose of this short video today is to show you guys, the woodcutters, how to identify cavities and standing snags before you fell them for firewood. According to the U.S. Forest Service woodcutting policy, woodcutters are not allowed to cut standing snags that contain cavities. So we're going to show you today how to identify cavities and snags and in order to leave those standing in the forest. Cavities are created by woodpeckers for nesting, and then those cavities in turn are used by over 100 different species of wildlife in Washington. So they're an important ecological resource to leave on the landscape. And so we're going to show you in our next stop how to identify some cavities and particular snags. Okay, here we are at a ponderosa pine snag, and this snag has a cavity in it that was made this year by a woodpecker. So we're going to walk up to it and show you guys where the cavity is. So here we are, and the cavity is, it's about 20 feet high in this ponderosa pine snag, and it faces to the left, so we can just see kind of the edge of it. And if you look, this was made by a northern flicker this year. They have since fledged their chicks, and if you look closely, there looks like there's a little stick poking out of the cavity, and a house wren has moved into this cavity already, and they are a secondary cavity nesting bird, so they use cavities that are made by woodpeckers, but they can't create the cavities themselves. So oftentimes, right after a woodpecker leaves and it's done using the cavity, another species will move right in the same year, and this cavity will be used in subsequent years until pretty much the snag falls down. So it's important for these snags with cavities to remain on the landscape so that the multitude of species that use them can still use this important resource. So at our next stop, we're going to move on to a little bit harder cavity to find, one that's a little bit higher up and obstructed by some branches. So here we are at another ponderosa pine snag, and we're going to walk up closer to it. There's a few cavities that are fairly high up, I'd say maybe about 30 feet high in this snag, and so we'll get a little bit closer look and zoom in on these guys. That little bare patch up there, you can kind of see two cavities, and then just above it a little bit in that patch of bark there's another cavity, and one of those was actually made this year by a hairy woodpecker, and those are probably 35, I would say maybe 40 feet high in this snag, and they may look really tiny from a distance and from down below, but those were made by a hairy woodpecker, and they will be used by smaller cavity nesters such as nuthatches and bluebirds. And so the point here is that you really need to look up and down the entire snag from top to bottom and walk all the way around the snag as well, because a cavity may not be visible from a single viewpoint, and if there's only one in the snag, it may be hard to see. Zoom in a little bit more. You can see a cavity there, and a little bit higher up, there's those cavities we were looking at earlier, a little bit more visible from this viewpoint. And so, take home message here, walk completely around the snag, look top for bottom, and even small cavities count as being important for cavity nesting species, and so these really need to remain on the landscape and not end up in your woodpile. So here we are, we're approaching a active white-headed woodpecker nest, and you can maybe hear in the background both the adults are starting to scold us. They're starting to give alarm calls. And these birds have nestlings in the cavity, and hence the reason why you can hear them in the background scolding us pretty vigorously. And most woodpeckers will do this. They will be very loud, very boisterous when you get close to an active nest, especially when they have nestlings in the cavity. And this is a time where you want to kind of be aware of what's going on around you when you're looking for a snag to fell for firewood. If you hear this sort of behavior and activity, you know you're too close to a nest, and it's best just to move out of the area. Because sometimes even falling snags in the area around a nest can be enough disturbance that could attract predators, because the more the birds are scolding and being agitated, that will draw in predators to the nest site. So it's best just to leave the area altogether if you hear this kind of activity. The birds are up there. One of the adults is up there in the pine, and one of those pines scolding us pretty good. So I just wanted to point this out, that if you hear this kind of noise and behavior and you see adult birds flying around and they seem agitated, you are near a nest site and it's best to move away, and that's what we're going to do now. Well, thank you very much for watching this short video. We hope that next time you're out cutting firewood, you will check over snags, look for cavities, and listen for potential wildlife that may be using those snags before you make your selection to cut that snag for firewood. And that will benefit Washington's wildlife across our landscape. Thank you.